3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of global music. So when it comes to music that has had a global presence on continents all over the world, the history is actually pretty short. You know, classical music, for example, when you had people like Beethoven and Mozart, their music may have been popular around Europe, but obviously wasn't being listened to in places like Africa or India. But with the emergence of the internet, the ability to listen to music all over the world is now easier than ever for artists to get a global presence and be known by people who may not even speak the same language that the music is performed in. Despite this, though, typically when it comes to music that has a true global presence, where musicians are known by name in foreign countries, is typically music coming out of the Western world that has this type of presence that is listened to globally. You know, people know who Eminem is, or Celine Dion, Elton John, or fairly recent artists like The Weeknd. And a big reason for this is the power and influence of Western nations in the entertainment industry, as well as the fact that English is the language of the world. So all these Western musicians who are performing and singing their songs in English automatically have a gigantic advantage over those who don't perform in English. As a result, very few non-English speaking musicians will ever get their songs played on the radio in countries like the US. For instance, in the US, it has been historically rare to hear any music that is in a foreign language on the radio, on these mainstream radio stations that people might be listening to on their way to work or on a road trip or whatever. In fact, in recent years, only a few examples come to mind of musicians who have had their music played on American radio stations all across the nation, getting that mainstream type of attention without being able to sing in English. And typically these people come from places like Latin America or South Korea. For example, there's the Puerto Rican rapper Daddy Yankee or the Korean singer Psy. These are two musicians who have garnered huge popularity in the US for their music. But this is really rare. And usually popular musical artists who may be super famous in their own countries are oftentimes completely unknown in the West. So with that, I wanted to highlight some historical examples of famous musicians that are considered absolute legends in their own countries that many people in the Western world probably have never heard of. So just starting off, in India, there is the musician Pandit Ravi Shankar, who was famous for introducing Indian music to the Western world, specifically Hindustani classical music. In fact, he even won several Grammy Awards and toured around the US and Europe in the 1950s and 60s. Additionally, just kind of a little fun fact, is that his daughter is the famous American singer Norah Jones, who many have probably heard of. Next, in Russia, there is the singer Alla Pugacheva, who is considered by many Russian speakers to be essentially the Russian Madonna, and was named in 1991 by Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, the national artist of the Soviet Union. However, today, though, she actually now lives in Israel after she and her husband were essentially chased out of Russia due to their criticism of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, thus showing just how far this cultural suicide in Russia has gone. Now moving into Asia, when it comes to the Chinese-speaking world, there is the singer Teresa Tong, who became famous for her love songs in the 1970s and 1980s. And in the African world, we have the musician Fela Kuti, who became famous for creating the Afrobeat style, which remains popular throughout Africa. Next, in the Arab world, there was the singer Kulthum, who was one of the most famous singers in the 1900s in the Arab world. And she was also one of the best-selling Arab artists ever. And lastly, in Brazil, there is Antonio Carlos Jobim, who would popularize a Brazilian style of music called the bossa nova in the 1960s. So all these different musicians are examples of people who were very famous and continue to be very famous in their respective countries. But for people, for example, in the US and probably for many in Europe, they are relatively unknown and haven't been heard of. So with that, I think really what I want to do is encourage people to kind of branch out. Obviously the Western world produces lots of very popular music, and that's great. But one thing about life is kind of branching out, enjoying other things that you may not be exposed to. We're starting to see this with the popularity of foreign films and TV shows on streaming platforms like Netflix, etc. But hopefully we start to see more music getting mainstream attention coming from overseas, not thinking Europe, but, in places like Africa and Asia and the Middle East and South America, getting more of this music into the US and Western Europe, because at the end of the day, that's a lot of great music that people are missing out on. So hopefully we can see that start to become more of a thing as the world becomes more and more globalized due to the internet culturally, and more people will be exposed to international music. So, as always, remember, billions of years led to you. So make the most of it.